Alex Ang, and I'm
the lighting.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be an October wrap-up, and I have a special guest with me. This is my boyfriend. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. Hi, I'm Alex's boyfriend. My name is Brandon. We go to college together, and we also love to read books.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring him on here because I mainly read with him, so I thought it'd be interesting for us. And we usually read the same books after each other. We kind of like swap. So I thought it'd be interesting for him to also share his perspective on the same books, but also some books that you read that I haven't read yet and that I'm looking forward to reading. So yeah, we'll just get started, and I'll go first with the book that I read. I started the month off reading Transcendent Kingdom by gyasi. This is a book about a PhD student in Stanford, and she's studying reward-seeking behavior in mice. And I love, so she basically uses science to kind of justify some of the actions in her life and some of the suffering that she's seen around her. And overall, I kind of just picked this up because it's gyasi, and like Homegoing has been on my TBR for years, and it's still on my shelf, but I haven't read it yet. But this is the new book by her. We spent a lot of money at an independent bookstore to buy this book. But yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised by it. It talks a lot about faith, which is kind of I don't really go look for books like that. But yeah, this is an interesting intersection between faith, science, love, and grief. It definitely pulled at my heartstrings. I definitely felt like this book was very emotional. If you guys have read Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee, it'll definitely make you feel the same way. I'm trying to get him to read it after me. But yeah, and it's also a short read. It's very quick. It doesn't drag on, and it's just a quality book. So, yeah.
Okay, so I want to first start by saying that I read more books than Alex this October so far.
I mean, October hasn't ended yet.
But I am still way ahead. And the first book that I read this October was a book called To Sleep in the Sea of Stars by Paolini. It's really, really tough read, but it was definitely well worth it. It's like 900 pages worth. It took me a while, but the story revolves around this explorer slash xenobiologist that is exploring the universe in the far future, and she's stuck with this unwanted alien parasite. And the story is about how her journey through the cosmos develops, and also the two wars that are happening around her at the same time that involve her and this xenoparasite. I definitely recommend this book if you like sci-fi, if you like also a little bit of horror here and there, and it's just definitely an epic adventure. And when I put it down, I couldn't there was a moment where I cried, but you know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the books where I usually we share a lot of our reads because it's just more economically friendly, but I definitely wouldn't pick up that book, not only because it's just long. I just am not interested in science fiction as much. I don't really like stuff about aliens or other planetary things. But yeah, we both had bought the books To Sleep in a Sea of Stars and Transcendent Kingdom at the same time, and we basically read it together, but we were reading totally different books, so it was super interesting to see each other's reactions. Obviously I finished it first because mine was shorter, but yeah. The next book that I read was The Mask Falling by Samantha Shannon. If you don't know, this is the 4th book in the Bone Season series, which I talk about on this channel so much. I love the Bone Season. If you didn't know, the Bone Season is kind of it's a futuristic fantasy that takes place in a society that that really doesn't like clairvoyant or voyant beings, and that's kind of the premise. It's, to say more would give away too much of the story, but this is the 4th book in a 7-book series. It's going to be 7 books long, and this is an arc. It comes out in, I think they changed it to January now, but as you can see, it's all sticky noted. I absolutely love this book. I can't really say anything else other than this series, even though it's been 4 books and it's gonna be 7 books. Every single book has caught on my attention. I've never lost attention, or it's never dragged out. But you might have some other things to say about it. But you only read the first book, so it's not a trustworthy.
I've been skeptical of the series after you had me read the first book, but I'm willing to try, especially since you were also reacting quite badly to that book as well at certain points.
Yeah, they're all super long and chunky, so I understand if you it's hard. It's daunting, and then some people are waiting for all 7 books to come out to start the series, and I'm how you're missing out. And yeah, I want him to read the next few books because I feel like the third and the second were my favorites. This is probably my favorite too. The first book, yeah, it's all first books are kind of just like meh because, you know, it's before the author like sells the book.
I'll give it another try for
Yeah.
sure. So the next book that I read
That
this
we
October-
read.
This was the first book that we buddy read well, not buddy read, but
Yeah.
like read together. The start of the Poppy Wars series. It's hell of a read, first of all, and what I really enjoyed about it was the references to historical Chinese stories that were set in Chinese literature, but also in Chinese history. So real life instances. And the story follows this girl named Fa Runin and her journey from basically Chinese poverty into one of the greatest military academies in China. Following that, there's a series of extreme conflicts and war that deal with the book's version of the Japanese. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and I would say there is a trigger warning for sure.
Yeah.
And
I did a reading vlog on this, so I will link it down below as well. You can kind of see my reaction. So he basically read the book first. He read the first and second book first, and then I read the first book like a week later because I was reading something else. But basically, I think our readings of it were very different. I spent a lot of time in the US, and like whereas you spend a lot of time in China for growing up. So I think you have like a different reading of it. For me, it was more like I was reading it as like entertaining, not really looking closely to the historical context, which I know a lot of people read this book for, like the historical context, and they get more like it's substantial, you know? For me, it was more like dissecting plot, dissecting character, and dissecting like the storyline, you know?
the reason we did read, after I read this book, I read the second book after, and I realized, in my belief, that the second book was like well written in terms of a novel experience, but for the Poppy War, I just really enjoyed the realistic historical like instances that were taken from Chinese history and placed into small iterations in the book, and I really enjoyed. They're kind of like Easter eggs for me, and that's why I really like this book.
Yeah, which leads us into the second book. So we both read the second book this month, and I love the second book. I think like the second book was so much better than the first one. It's kind of like the Bone Season series where like the first book is like it's like hit or miss, and it kind of like makes people go away from the series. But the second book is so much more developed, and I just kind of like the storyline of this one better. I thought it was more action-packed, whereas the first one kind of dragged out a little, and it was also like not consistent in terms of like action and plot line. But yeah, what did you think? Did you like the second book better?
In terms of the storyline, it was more linear. You could actually see where things were going to happen. Not that that's a bad thing. It was better. Like the structure was better sought out, and there were still those historical instances that I really enjoyed. I would say, yeah, the first book can be hit or miss. I happen to enjoy both of them, and I happen to be really enjoying the series. Can't wait for the next book to come out, and yeah. I fall in love with the characters all the way through.
Remember how I hyped you up for it and I sent you all those tweets? Was it worth the hype? Like, overall. Like for me, I definitely think so, because people like kept saying like very vague, ominous things. Like they were like, you don't know what you're in for, you're about to be like, the book's gonna upset you. Like what do you think?
Definitely in the first book there were moments that resonated really deeply because of those, trigger warning areas, but they held parallels with human history, and that's why it struck me a lot harder, because those things they're not just fiction, they actually happen. And I say yes, it does live up to the hype, and we also forgot to mention that there is the magical, so it's like historical fiction mixed in with a bit of fantasy as well, and it's seamlessly written in there into Chinese mythology as well, and that's why it's done so well. So I think it does definitely live up to the hype.
Yeah, there are very few like historical fiction fantasy books that have done like the time period justice. Although, like you said, I think it's interesting that we're both talking about it because I read it from a fiction standpoint. So I literally thought all the events in this book were fiction.
Yeah.
And then you said they were based on real events, and I'm like, oh, that makes no sense. Or that's interesting how she turned that into a fictitious like event, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It's just, it took in like actual history moments in Chinese history, but there's also like references to Chinese literature as well. So like mythology and really famous works that were written, that were fiction in Chinese history, but were brought into the book. So I like that.
Also, we watched an interview where she was talking, and then we found out she was like 19 when she wrote the Poppy War. So like every time I look at the Poppy War now, it's like seeing it and just being like, oh my god, that's crazy.
We are not worthy.
Yeah, we were just like, we just couldn't believe it's just not like can't believe it, but yeah.
Right. I took a break from really serious war and pain, and I started reading romance because I couldn't handle it. And the first book I wrote was this one, The Hating Game.
You wrote?
I read was The Hating Game, and I just needed a break from destruction, war, and suffering.
Wait, so this is a reread.
This is a reread. Sorry, I forgot.
I don't know how he rereads books.
I love to reread books. I can remember, and I love like reliving what the characters are reliving. Anyway, so this is a hating game, or a hate/love story between two characters, Lucy Hutton and Joshua Templeman, and it's just, there's so many laughs, so many moments where you can smile like an idiot while reading it. There's also just some really tender moments that I really enjoy between these two characters that initially absolutely despise each other, unlike other people that we will not mention. But yeah, it's just a journey of how close the hate and love emotions are to each other, and I love following their storyline. I loved the character development that happened throughout the book, and I am absolutely recommending that Alex should read this, and she will be reading this next.
I'm reading it next. Yeah, I think that like it's so interesting how I like introduced you to the genre of adult romance, and like you were like obsessed with it now, and like you don't prefer it over fantasy, but like you definitely, like, it's something that you seek out. Like, if I give you a book and I say adult romance, you're like, oh yeah, I'll read this book.
Yeah, I need that break from like high fantasy sometimes. Yeah,
and I definitely think a lot of the books here, it's actually a really good mix of like adult and like YA. Yeah, because we're kind of like drifting off from YA. But yeah, I'm gonna start reading this. I was gonna say this is my current read, even though I haven't started it yet. It's still, we're filming this in like October, late October, so I still have some time to start this and finish it. And yeah, I'm excited. I've just heard so much about this book that I know it's gonna be good. So like I know you said it's good, but like everyone has told me already. So okay, the next book that I read is The Peregrine by J.A. Baker. I'm just including this because I actually read it in October. So I took a class called Reading Nature in the Global Novel. We read a lot of climate fiction in that class, which I was really happy about because I love reading about like climate change and the environment in novels. So yeah, The Peregrine is basically like, it's classified as a nonfiction book, but I would classify it as fantasy. I know that's like a hard stretch. But it follows like the author's, him like journeying across like New England, I think, or England, and following like the trails and the movements of a group of like the peregrine falcons. Yeah, I don't know what, it's so vivid and like, it's so vivid, and it's also just like about birds. Like, if you love birds, you will love this book. Like, there's just so much bird content, first of all. He's like, it's basically him bird watching. But then there's also like a surprise magical element and fantasy, which I didn't, like, when you read the synopsis and you also hear about this, it's called like a classic, a nonfiction book. You have no idea that it happens. But for that reason, I think I like this book. If this would have just been like a diary entry of this guy like following birds, probably wouldn't have liked it as much, even though his writing is so beautiful and like the way he describes some things, like the landscape is like so beautiful and his like metaphors. So I like surprisingly liked it, but it wasn't like my favorite book that we read in the class, much less not my favorite book that I read this month. But it was like a good one, and it was like, it's super short. It's like less than 200 pages, so like you can easily read it. But yeah. You
described it as a drug trip at one point.
Oh yeah, so a review said that like you don't need to take LSD because this book exists. So yeah, if that makes you want to read this book, then you should read it. But like other than that, I think it talks a lot about like the environment and like climate change. So for that reason, I liked like the message of this book. And apparently it's super popular in like like classic literature. Like, you know.
So, after reading one romance novel, I need another one because of trauma. So I read The Kiss Quotient right after. I reread. It was a reread from a while ago, but The Kiss Quotient was the first adult romance novel that Alex recommended to me, and it was the first one that I fell in love with. So I really, really enjoyed the story, and I just wanted to relive it again after trauma. So The Kiss Quotient is about this girl who has Asperger's and has had many failing relationships before, due to her reaction to physical touch and also emotional stress. So she deals with that by hiring a male escort. And the goal was that she wanted to learn how to do these things well, like learning how to be physical and be the ideal woman in what she thought was in her eyes. So this male escort later, his name is Michael Fan, later starts to develop this relationship with her where she can only be physical and emotionally tied to him, even though she doesn't necessarily want to. And the dynamic between the two, it's just really precious, you could say. It's really like, the romance is really fragile because of the circumstances, but also it's really endearing. And it's definitely a read if you enjoy that kind of sappy romance that also has a little bit of like tragedy.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's definitely, if you're just going into romance, I would feel it's a very good it's a very good first read, and I really enjoy it. I will always reread these books probably because of the way that they make me feel.
Yeah, I think that's like the huge difference between adult romance and young adult romance. Is adult romance is very much less surface level.
It's more real.
It like touches upon it's the romance is a background like acting sort of thing to like the actual main conflict or like problems. Yeah, like sometimes like a lot of stories talk about like grief and how that plays with like romance and relationships, and I think that's really cool. I think what The Hating Game was also just really like, it was really like deep, right? And, like,
The Hating Game in a way was more lighthearted than The Kiss Quotient, but The Kiss Quotient, before I read these romance books, before I was interested, I did not strike myself as a person who liked to read romance. And that's why I'm really thankful that you kind of introduced me into that vein. And I will shamefully admit that I am a romance nut. So
because I feel like anyone will like it doesn't really matter because it's just good. Good books can be loved by everyone.
Yeah.
The Kiss Quotient, like, and then we also read Helen Hoang's other book, The Bride Test.
Yes.
I didn't like that one as much.
I still liked it.
Wait, do we have that in your?
I have it in my bookshelf. I didn't read it because I like these two better than that one, but it's still good. And yeah, you got nothing left.
I got nothing left. Alright, go ahead.
Alright, fine. Next book for me was pretty much probably my favorite book this
Wait, really?
Actually, not even kidding.
Wait, better than the Poppy War?
It's the emotions that I felt in this book were stronger. Like, the reason I probably would, like, if I were to have like a ride or die choice, I would probably choose the Poppy War series.
Yeah.
But this is like a close second, or like I would probably lean towards this one.
No, we talked about this, didn't we? Say like this was like your best reading month in like your entire life, like you.
Not my entire life,
Yeah,
but
like,
definitely in like
years.
years.
Yeah, in years, like he read just great book after great book after great book. So every time he'd finish reading a book, I'd be like, and he'd start a new one, I'd be like, is this one better than the last one? Is this one better than the Poppy War and To Sleep in a Sea of Stars combined?
Yeah.
And it was really funny because I just wanted to know, you know?
Yeah, and every time that I answer, I would say that each one was different. So, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, best science fiction book that I've read since Ender's Game, and that's because Ender's Game has a soft spot in my heart because I think it was my first real science fiction book, and the similarities were there because I love that book. But it's definitely, if I were to compare to all of them, not my favorite. The Poppy War is just the amount of conflict and trauma. It just dredged up all this.
I don't think you've ever read a book like that.
I have not, definitely not, and it dredged up all of this emotion that I've not really experienced when reading a book, and I've read a lot of books and am very surprised that I've never felt that way. But this is it. I think this is the one for me because this is crazy. Schwab, you are insane because this is one of the best books that I've probably ever read. It goes around the story of this girl named Addie LaRue who makes a deal with the devil. He's not, well, he's, you know, he's the mystical supernatural figure that's all powerful. So she becomes basically invisible to everyone that she meets, and also immortal. So every time that she meets a person, 5 minutes later or just a few seconds after they stop like talking to her or addressing her, they instantly forget who she is. So she is immortal through this whole time. 300 years later, she's lived on this earth for 300 years. She meets a guy, and the guy is the first person that ever acknowledges her more than just a few instances, and the story revolves around the two. It also recounts through history all the moments that she's experienced in those 300 years. We've read a review.
Yeah, we read a review that was super interesting, and I hadn't read the book yet, so I sent it to him, and he thought it was a really interesting point of view. But apparently this book, because it goes through history and it follows, the main character is white, it erases there's a lot of like BIPOC erasure through like cultural exclusion. Yeah.
My argument to that, yes, that is true. There was almost no representation in terms of you know, by POC, but there was representation in the LGBTQ community, and also if she was because Addie larue is French in the book. If she was from like 300 years ago, a French town in that area, the amount of like available travel would have been really, really limited in terms of through history, especially with the world wars that were talked about in the book. I would say that her journey makes a lot of sense in terms of she probably just traveled around Europe, lived for many years in Europe, and would have not had the chance to travel farther out into the world. There's the argument that if you're immortal, you can do that, but I would say in terms of the character, it makes sense that it was written this way.
I mean, like, I always like, I haven't read it yet, but I always like, it's 2020. Like, I mean, I think there's a huge argument of like inclusion of like BIPOC characters in order to like, I mean, just for the fact of like, you know, you don't want to be like erasing these cultures. But I also definitely think a lot of people say like, talk about like performative inclusion, and that's also a big thing too, because if you didn't plan it to be a big part of your book, but then you like try to force it in there, it's completely it doesn't seem real. It's just,
And so that's why like I agree with some of the things that review said in terms of not having enough representation, but in terms of where the story was set, I think logically it makes sense that it was written this way. Anyway, probably one of my most favorite books.
He cried!
Yes, I cried. I'm a crybaby.
Wait, did you read it? Did you finish it here?
No, I finished it back at home.
Okay, it was...
And it was such a lovely book, and I really recommend it to anybody. There is a romance that is like not as, you know, sexually explicit as the romances that I read before, but it's really the words that I kept describing that whenever we would call and I would like talk about the book were bittersweet, forlorn, and just this kind of longing that you feel when reading this book and relating with the characters. So
yeah.
Do you have any more?
No, you have one more. Wait, no, you have two more.
I have two more.
Okay, two more. It's fine.
So after reading that emotional
He's
drama,
a faster reader than me.
I am.
Also, yeah, I have no other excuse. I was gonna say I was working, but
no excuse. Also, I remember more of what's in the books than she does.
But I've also read more books probably in my life.
I doubt it very much.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You've seen my library back at home. So next book I wrote. Sorry, not wrote. Read.
You wrote all of these.
I wrote all of these. Was this one, A Song of Wraith and Ruins. This one was a very interesting one because
it's one that I like bought for you. So usually for books, like I always get really just like crazy for books, and I'm always like, I'm just gonna buy this one for you to read it, and you have to read it.
And I would read it, right?
Yeah, because I think he trusts my recommendations as of now, but also like it's harder for you to find books because you're not on Bookstagram and like the BookTube community, so it's harder for you to find like what's good out there. You usually just like go to Barnes & Nobles and buy like the best covers, right?
Yeah, whenever I would have my hauls and bring back to China, I would just read the synopsis, look at the cover, and if it's like 50-50 chance it's a good book, so I take it and then I read all of them. So yeah, this book follows the story of, it has another supernatural element because it is high fantasy, of a boy named Malik and a princess by the name that I can't remember at the moment. Sorry, I apologize.
Let's see. Mama Karina?
Karina, that's right. So it's written in the perspective of both of them, so sometimes it switches in between. I love that in fantasy books, and it has the supernatural element in that there is a magical element in this book. In terms of all the books that I've written, I've read. Sorry, I've read. I would say it's my least favorite, but that by no means means that this is a bad book. It was a very well written high fantasy, and I did enjoy reading it. But after the deluge of like really good books, it was like less memorable to me than the other ones. I really still enjoyed it, so please, if you ever find this book on a bookshelf, please pick it up.
Yeah,
and
also
read
just
it.
Like it's so beautiful. There's this is like was it like West African?
It's I would say it's Saharan. Because they're not Middle Eastern, but like North African Saharan mythology. The terms I didn't know exactly the language that it was, getting influence from. So I don't know exactly where the influence was coming from, but it definitely was a very conscientious towards a specific culture, and I really enjoyed that about it. And the mythology also fit within that culture. I didn't look it up and see what it was, but I definitely enjoyed that aspect of it. The characters were there was I could relate to them, but I also didn't think that they were completely like they were fleshed out, but I didn't relate completely to them as I would have with the other books.
I think this is your only YA book of the month. I think. I don't remember.
I don't think none of these books were YA.
Yeah, this is so. How is it like? I do think that was a reason why it was less memorable.
I think so. I think I'm moving. Sadly, I think there's this transition that happens when you go from YA into like adult fiction.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's hard, and you also go back and think about all those YA books that you love and like kind of like think about like you're like, oh, these maybe weren't as good as I thought they were. Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
There are still series that I just will always love and will continue rereading, most likely Demon King, for example.
Yeah.
Final book in our wrap up, yes.
Yeah, but you're
currently reading is Plain Bad Heroines. This book is very creepy. But I definitely enjoy in the spirit of October and Spooktober with Halloween coming up. I definitely enjoy that. It's actually mentioned. It's called Spooktober. Okay?
It's mentioned in the book?
No.
Oh,
like
okay.
it's an internet thing. But I really enjoy this book. There's just the writing is so unique, and the author, what happens when you're reading it is that there's footnotes at the bottom where the author is talking to me as a reader and any of the readers, and constantly references to the readers things that they want me to remember. Like, for example, at one point, like when there's like a specific name that they want me to remember, it's just like, readers, please remember this name, it will come up later. And there's just got all these references to the LGBTQ community, and it's a very tough read. I'm going through this a lot slower than I would with the other books that I read this October, and I am definitely enjoying it. There's just these creepy moments that I don't feel they're not unnecessary, they're just unexpected for me as I'm reading. They just suddenly pop up, and suddenly like I got chills down my spine. So.
Yeah, this is I bought this book for myself mainly because this is the author's debut like adult novel. She's written a YA novel before that was really popular, was turned into a movie. And I don't know, I'm really excited about this because of the LGBT representation. I also think it's just a beautiful cover. I really like horror books. I just haven't read many. The last horror book that I read was by Rory Power. I forgot what the book is called. But yeah, that was the last horror book I read, and it wasn't even that scary, and so I'm kind of looking for some horror, especially like during the season. It's probably gonna take me a while too, so I probably won't finish it before October. I won't even start in October. Yeah, but that's still a book that I'm interested in reading too. But yeah, that's all for today's video. Yeah, like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!
Bye.